Oh, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning if you're in Vancouver, and good afternoon if you are in Calgary. I am Catherine Lyon. I'm Assistant Professor of Teaching in Sociology at UBC, and I'm joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. On behalf of the Sociology Research Forum, I am thrilled and also grateful to welcome Dr. Sarah Eaton to share her research in progress about artificial intelligence and academic integrity. Dr. Eaton is Associate Professor at the Workland School of Education, University of Calgary. She's also the Editor-in-Chief of the esteemed International Journal of Educational Integrity. Dr. Eaton has published 5 books on academic integrity, including Plagiarism in Higher Education, Tackling Tough Topics in Academic Integrity, and Contract Cheating in Higher Education, Global Perspectives on Theory, Practice, and Policy. Dr. Eaton's scholarship of academic integrity has received Research Excellence Awards from the Canadian Society for the Study of Higher Education and the European Network for Academic Integrity. Throughout today's talk, please save your questions until the end, when you can use the raise hand function to speak out loud, or you can post them in the chat. Dr. Eaton and I will moderate the Q&A together. So welcome, Dr. Eaton. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise today.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation to join you. Of course, please call me Sarah. And I would love for anybody who's joining us today to just pop a note into the chat to let me know what your academic discipline is or your field, what brought you to the session today. I'd love to learn a little bit more about you as well. And also wanted to give a special shout out to members of the academic integrity community who are here joining us today, who I think are working outside the sociology field. So I'll bring up my slides so we can have a look at them as we go through. I have a presentation, and I was just saying before the session, I'm really excited about today because we've been doing a fair number of talks in terms of public scholarship around this topic and sort of things for a general public audience, but the chance to talk about it from a research perspective is pretty exciting for me. So thanks for the opportunity to do that. So I'm going to dive right in. And I wanted to just start with an acknowledgement of I'm joining you today from my campus office at the University of Calgary, which is located in southern Alberta on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, comprising the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary, also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Okay, so with our project, which is Artificial Intelligence and Academic Integrity, I think one of the things I'll do just to kind of get us started off here, and thank you for letting us know where you're joining in from today, I'm going to pop into the chat the Open Science Framework site that we have for our project, so you can check it out a little bit later. But also wanted to just kind of start by talking about this as a transdisciplinary area of research. What I mean when I say this area, I mean academic and research integrity. Thinking about transdisciplinary fields, research fields in particular, as those addressing wicked problems in society, problems that cannot be addressed by any one individual or discipline alone. I don't have a slide for this, but I'm drawing largely from Lawrence's work here on notions of transdisciplinarity as tackling these complex real-world problems that require input from a multitude of different stakeholders. In our case, this is an academic project. Some other projects that we're working on, we also have community partners on those. But for this one, I deliberately wanted to bring together people from different areas of our campus. And this team was originally comprised of people who had never worked together as a team before. I had worked with a couple of people individually, but this team is a new team for this project. So I'm leading it from the School of Education. So it starts with the social sciences background. We have some research assistants working with us. We have a project manager as well. We have one research assistant, Beatriz Moya, who's doing the qualitative data collection for us. We have another research assistant, Mawulite, whose background is in quantitative and statistical analysis. So he's doing some of the work around the survey. In addition, we have colleagues from the School of Engineering, specifically mechanical engineering, and that's Bob Brennan. Bob also has a background in engineering education. Bob and I had worked together previously on a project because he had a project around agent-based modeling where he was looking at student academic misconduct. Then we partnered with someone from the Faculty of Arts, specifically the Department of English. Jason Weens previously held a role as an associate dean, and in that role, he had academic misconduct as part of his portfolio. So that was the adjudication of misconduct cases. Jason's background is in English literature and creative writing, so he brought that creative lens to the project. And then we also included a member of our professional staff. That's from Student Accessibility Services. This is Dr. Brenda McDermott. Brenda holds a PhD in communication studies. One feature of transdisciplinary research is that academic researchers will extend beyond academic boundaries and include stakeholders from other areas. In this case, we wanted to made an intentional decision to include a member of professional staff because academic integrity as a discipline is both an applied practice that includes some of the ugly work in higher education, like the adjudication of cases, and also work around teaching, learning, and promoting ethical conduct, and then as well as a field of academic, both theoretical and applied research, but mostly applied research. So we felt it was important to bring in voices of higher education professionals. In this case, Brenda also has full academic credentials, holding a PhD and 2 master's degrees, including one in education. So this was the team we started with. I can tell you when our team came together, we got our teaching and learning grant for this project in 2022. I think the results came out about a year ago for that competition. And I can back up a little bit and say, we put the team together the fall prior. So it was fall of 2021 when this team originally came together. We had very different axiological starting places. So I came from the place of wanting to understand this through an ethics lens and look at it that way. My colleague from the School of Engineering was interested in the implementation and also the development of artificial intelligence tools from a values perspective. He really felt like this was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and bring on the robots. That view is not shared by our colleague from the English department, who was very hesitant, cautious, felt like this was probably going to be heinous and needed to be stopped immediately. And then our colleague from Student Accessibility Services turned everything upside down when she challenged us very early on in the project by asking questions such as, well, if this is an assistive or an adaptive technology, would we be violating students' human rights if we denied them access to it? So here we came together as a team that with very different starting positions philosophically on this, and also in terms of having done applied work with students either through disability advocacy, misconduct case management, or applied research previously. So we're like, okay, this is interesting. So we really started by listening to one another as scholars and professionals and trying to come to a common ground, which I would say we've done over the past year, and through our regular research team meetings, which for us happen every 2 weeks. And so today I'll talk a little bit about the project, some of the gaps in the research. It's a pretty typical research presentation. You would know what those are. We don't have data yet, so I can't share that with you, but I can certainly tell you where we're at in the project. In terms of the project, we wanted to look specifically at algorithmic writing technologies. Of course, the common term for this that we've come to know is ChatGPT. That's being used almost like the word Kleenex is used to refer to a facial tissue, but we all know what we mean when we talk about a Kleenex. We think we know what we mean when we talk about ChatGPT. However, the technology is advancing very quickly. And we already know that ChatGPT is one app, and there are literally thousands of apps available to students now that will focus on algorithmic writing technologies. We wanted to look at some of the ethical complexities around this. We knew, but already by looking at social media, that there was some polarized discussion, opinions, different sort of, as we had at the beginning of our team, different value propositions to start with. And so we wanted to bring in evidence-based discourse to it, not only for teaching and learning, but also policymaking. And then look at it from these different academic disciplines, because we knew that this technology would impact us across our campus and beyond. When we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about computing systems that are able to engage in human-like processes, such as learning, adapting, synthesizing, self-correction, use of data for complex processing tasks. We take the assumption that artificial intelligence is not yet sentient. We understand that that opinion is not shared by all experts or scholars out there, but for the purposes of our research, this is one of the starting points for us. And when we talk about algorithmic text generating software, we're talking about writing tech that is capable of creating original text, either from scratch or with user input. This idea of original text was important for us because of much of the discourse around plagiarism and academic integrity is based around students doing original work. So we wanted to understand the ways in which this technology could disrupt the notion of original work, and by extension, disrupt current definitions and understandings of things like plagiarism. We know that natural language processing, NLP, as it's called for short, is also related to other kinds of artificial technologies, deep learning, pre-trained, generative pre-trained transformer, the GPT tech, and also fine-tuning. And just acknowledging that some of the artwork today was created by members of our team or by artificial intelligence. Of course, like any good research project, we started with our literature review. When we started a year ago, we noted that there was very little scholarship available looking at addressing the ethical and pedagogical implications of artificial intelligence tools for teaching and learning. Since we started our project, a lot more literature has emerged, but from a research perspective, we are noticing more and more preprints that are out there and people posting papers on ResearchGate, on institutional repositories, and the amount of peer-reviewed literature and high-quality journals remains limited. We also noted that there was more research needed to differentiate human from artificial intelligence capabilities. And one of the papers that we liked the most was by Margaret Behrman and her colleague in Australia. And they really started asking the question about what can humans do that artificial intelligence can't do? And what does this mean for teaching and learning in higher ed? So that paper is one I particularly wanted to highlight. And also Philip Dawson's work around looking to differentiate between student behaviors in terms of academic coping or students engaging in help-seeking behaviors versus those who are intentionally trying to cheat. And there's a fair amount of research and discourse about those sort of different approaches and intentionality and lack of intentionality. And there's some of that comes from other social scientists, criminologists, for example, and others. But we really wanted to sort of differentiate what does this mean. And I'll come back to Philip Dawson a little bit later in the session today. His work has been quite influential for us. And then finally, we wanted to look at the ways that AI tools will challenge educators in terms of teaching and assessment, raising questions about ethics in our classrooms. So that was a little bit of our literature review. The main research question that we had is, what are the ethical implications of AI intelligence tools for teaching, learning, and assessment? We still don't have an answer to this. We're starting to puzzle through it, not just in terms of the use and how do I apply this, but how do I apply this in a way that is ethical? And these are some of the complexities that we're trying to disentangle with this research. One of the members of our research team, Brenda McDermott, the disability advocate, has really raised some interesting questions for us around equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in this work. Brenda created this slide, so I need to give her props for that. And she wanted us to think about the benefits that are offered in terms of EDI-A and looking at natural language processing development and its ways of increasing accessibility to learning tools, such as text summarization and real-time captioning. It was also from Brenda that I learned that the predictive text function that we have on our phones and on our computers that will predict the next word when we're writing a message was a technology that was originally developed in the 1980s for persons with disabilities, and then later became integrated into everyday tech apps that we use today. So she was encouraging us to think about the ways that these tools can provide opportunities for a variety of students to engage and represent and express themselves in a multitude of different ways. Also noting, of course, that there are some drawbacks in terms of equity from these tools, and that natural language processing, they are created using data sets that are not representative of all people, and result in bias and can result in a poor user experience. So we know that, for example, the data set or corpus used to create ChatGPT was a corpus that was first of all, it ended in 2021. So ChatGPT did not access the internet in real time. Of course, we have GPT-4 now. Things are changing rapidly, but also noting the bias that is literally baked into some of these apps. For example, the outputs can favor a certain kind of English. So it reproduces not only biases in language, but biases in terms of preferred language. So when people would ask me, oh, how can I detect this kind of output? There's a couple of different ways, but one of the telltale ways early on was that the outputs were always generated in American English. And so it did not recognize or show any way of valuing British English, world Englishes, and so forth. And so there are a number of ethical questions to consider in how the apps themselves are developed and then deployed. So these were some of the things that we started to think about when we were thinking about the ethics of this, particularly because EDIA is a topic that we're paying more and more attention to in higher education, and justifiably so. In terms of our research design, we have borrowed from a team at Brock University who developed a survey there, in which they used a modified Turing test, and they had writing samples created by a human, one created by artificial intelligence, in their case generated by GPT-2, and then one where it was taken directly from the internet and we didn't know who generated the text or how it was generated. And then we offered, what we did with their permission was we adapted and expanded their research instruments. So our colleagues, Kumar et al. At Brock, developed a survey that was only used in the Faculty of Education there. With their permission and collaboration, we expanded the survey so it could be used across a variety of disciplines, with writing samples relating to general interest topics, as well as some that would be specific to STEM disciplines. And then we also wanted to understand the participant demographic information, because the early results from the Brock study, which are as yet unpublished, found that, if I remember correctly, people who spoke English as an additional language were better at identifying text generated by artificial intelligence, which was an interesting preliminary finding from their survey, which they're calling a pilot. They had just under 300 responses. In addition, we added a second layer. So ours would be a mixed method study where we will be including interviews where we're asking participants that will include professors, students, teaching assistants, etc., about their awareness of artificial intelligence, the perceived ethical issues with it, as well as the role of AI to support equity and access in it. So we're just in our study now, we're just at the stage of collecting data. However, we've been able to engage in some early knowledge mobilization. We have a rapid scoping review underway, for which the protocol has been published and is available. We hope to have the scoping review itself is about 80% done and should be ready to submit fairly soon. And just this week, I think it was Monday, we had our first paper published as a group in the International Journal of Mechanical Engineering Education. This was led by our colleagues in engineering who are part of our team, and led by one of the research assistants actually on the project with the support of a supervisor. And others of us chimed in. I can say from the perspective of transdisciplinary research, this was an interesting paper for me to work on. I have no background in engineering or mathematics, and there are parts of the paper that I had to work really hard to understand because it's so far out of my discipline. And there were parts that I could contribute with my background in academic integrity and contribute to the literature review that they didn't have that background on. So one of the, I think, takeaways for doing this as transdisciplinary research is to get comfortable in uncomfortable spaces where we're not all the experts. In terms of the funding, well, we got a 2022 University of Calgary Teaching and Learning Grant for $40,000, which was the maximum amount we have for our internal teaching and learning grants. We were also awarded an International Researcher Partnership Workshop Grant. This was from University of Calgary International, or the Central International Office under the Provost, the Vice Provost International. That was for specific travel to cover travel that I'll talk about in just a minute. And we were then able to leverage that grant to get a SSHRC connection grant that we just found out yesterday that we got. So we're very excited about that. So this now becomes SSHRC funded research. And that was specifically to have an event at the University of Calgary campus around this. Earlier, you heard me mention Phil Dawson, whose work around cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and academic integrity is world-renowned. And we, because of this funding, will now be able to bring Phil to our campus for a public talk and begin to think about the next level of this research, which for us would be a SSHRC PDG or a PG grant. That's the big plan for this. So Phil will be coming to join us in June, and we want to look at extending this to a multi-university, multi-country study. So this is our big plan for the research. And we have already our public talk website up with the support of our dean's office. We don't have registration available yet, but we are hoping that the event will be live streamed. So you can mark your calendar if you would like to join us for that. If you've never heard Phil Dawson speak, he's really a cool guy and very well informed in his area around cybersecurity. So we're excited about that. In terms of the expected outcomes from the project, well, we're really hoping to promote a deeper understanding of what ChatGPT and similar technologies can do, what they can't do. And we want our teaching staff, educators, pros, TAs to be able to apply and understand and apply these technologies ethically in a variety of ways in order to support learning outcomes. So we talk a lot about assessments being fit for purpose, meaning that assessments should align to learning outcomes, and that is part of our broader conversations. We also want to support faculty to reflect on assumptions about artificial intelligence tools. This was built in part on the assumptions that we brought to the project as researchers from different disciplines, ranging from this is horrible and needs to be banned, to this is the best thing ever, why isn't it here already? And then other perspectives that really challenged us. And we also wanted to challenge assumptions that about restricting the technology. And I can say already, because of the work that we've done as this team, I believe we've been able to influence campus conversations that have led us not to ban these technologies, but rather to take a proactive approach to the ethical implementation on campus. And finally, we wanted to help our colleagues and other educators better focus on learning outcomes for their courses and thinking about mechanics of writing versus conceptual organization, writing as an output, the importance of fact-checking, and other aspects of writing. Of course, we don't have evidence yet. We're still in the process of collecting our data. But we also wanted to think about ways of future-proofing our policies for ongoing advancement. We've already had conversations on our campus about do our academic integrity policies need to be updated? And one of the things we brought forward was basically a timeline showing that the development of these tools from about 2017 to now, the speed of development is unlike anything we have seen in our careers. And we have cautioned that if we change the policy today, that just to respond to this, that it will probably be outdated in a year. Because when we started designing this project, I mentioned that our colleagues at Brock use ChatGPT or GPT-2. So our research instrument, which for us is based on GPT-2 and GPT-3 outputs, is already outdated. So we don't know what the landscape will look like, but because of this project, we've been keeping our finger on the pulse of the developments, and we believe it's perfectly reasonable to assume that artificial intelligence capabilities will be integrated into Microsoft Office products and Google Suite products within the next 12 to 24 months, in which case we might need to have different conversations again about the implications for policy, misconduct, teaching, learning, etc. And we wanted to be able to provide some informed perspective on this, especially when there was a lot of nervousness on our campus and questions about, do we need to change our policy today? And also thinking about digital literacy, AI literacy, and what are some of the skills that students and colleagues will need going forward, and the idea of understanding the ethical application of this and some of the nuances around that. And then finally, again, the impact of prohibiting technology use, or what our colleague Brenda McDermott has deemed beat the bot options, and its impact on diverse learners, especially those who are neurodiverse. And again, one of the things that we've been able to do, I think, is as a result of this is, as I mentioned, is to influence the ways in which our teaching and learning center is taking a proactive approach to this. So this is largely based on our literature review so far, but we've been able to contribute, I think, to some productive conversations and offer really practical classroom advice for colleagues about, okay, what is this? What do I do with it? How do I tackle it in my classroom? And so we now have this resource from our teaching and learning center that I can post a link to a little bit later on. And so this is basically a very brief overview of our research project. I'm hoping to have lots of time for discussion, thoughts, and questions. So maybe I'll take down the slides and look forward to your input and your thoughts and reflections on this. Thanks for inviting me, by the way.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation. So Sarah and I will moderate together. So if you have questions, you're welcome to raise your hand or just unmute because it's a small group. Or if you prefer, you can post your questions in the chat.
Hi, can I go first? Sorry. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us and for the presentation today. I do have several questions. I'm going to ask just two of them for now, just to give space, and maybe we can later on come back to my questions. Okay, so as you see, you mentioned like the learning AI as learning support versus a tool for cheating, right? So I'm myself not a English native speaker, right? So there were before ChatGPT, there were tools that I kind of still have it installed on my laptop. Once in a while it shows up. One of them is Grammarly. It's just a very basic tool that underlines, like highlights the words. It makes grammar suggestion to improve writing, right? So in my experience early on, years ago, it was that I would write something and emails or whatever, the highlights would help me actually. And then I would remember that next time I would not repeat the mistake, right? So I come from that perspective that it has helped me improve my way of writing. But then you brought up this point of that it is, in a sense, these systems are streamlining, like their data comes from one form of language, if it is the mainstream US linguistic forms. So I'm just thinking in terms of improvement versus a homogenizing effect that they have, right? If everyone is now going to use the same form of writing, the same form of speaking as a way of training, I'm basically being trained by those AIs, right? I'm just not sure on the ethical point. Is that a negative thing or is that a positive thing? We are streamlining our way of writing. It means easier communication across opportunities for teaching and learning and improvement for students. So I don't know. I'm just thinking, and I'm just sharing this with you. I don't know what you think about that. The streamlining, the support effect versus. Yes, I understand there might be some loss on this side of other subgroups, right? The linguistic groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was just wondering in general, if you have any information on what the difference is between GPT-2, 3, and 4. Is it in terms of like their speed of data processing, their precision in terms of what they have produced? Like why do they have these different names?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I can go back to the first one first. So Grammarly is driven by machine learning, which is, it's part of the subset of similar tools. Machine learning is not always the same as artificial intelligence. It's a little bit different, but it's certainly driven with that base, right? To be responsive to input and offer suggestions, etc. I'm in favor of such language tools. Before I came to education, I had a background in second languages. And at the time, I would also turn to tools such as Google Translate to help me understand things. So I'm also a proponent of those tools as a means to assist And in some case, not in your case, it sounds like, but for learners with less proficiency to cope in academic settings. I've always differentiated between academic coping and academic cheating. They're not the same, shouldn't be conflated. The same with researchers. In terms of like Grammarly is just like, it's in a way like a modern dictionary or a modern thesaurus, right? We would never ask students to cite a dictionary or thesaurus in their essays. So why are we asking them to cite the use of these other tools? I know that position is not shared by everyone, but I'm entirely with you, and we're on the same page. And I do believe that there can be a lot of benefit in terms of streamlining. Yes, I think in some ways the tools reflect the values in higher education itself, that there is an academic discourse, there's academic English, there's scholarly writing discourse, there's language register, formal, informal, etc. And these tools are aligning with systems and language systems that have already been set up and continue to be perpetuated by humans. So if a person wants to survive in academia, they need to learn academic English. And so the tools will funnel us in that direction. Some of the criticisms are, for example, that it might not share an output that reflected, say, the vernacular of Black Americans. That's not to say that future tools couldn't do such a thing. We know that current tools can. You can choose the type of output or language register. You can have an informal output, formal output, academic output, depending on the kind of tools. So it's possible over time that the bias that they have in them now could be something that's addressed. This is one of the things I've heard critics talking about, that it's perpetuating colonial approaches to English language. That may be true. However, that perpetuation is something that the academy itself already does. We could argue, and of course it's important to continue to work against that and value other voices and other types of Englishes, if you will. And that's a job for the whole academy, as well as the developers of these tools. Did I come close to even answering your question?
Of course, yes, I appreciate that. It was yeah, I do acknowledge it. As you said, that's part of our effort, like recognizing different ways of writing. I acknowledge it. I do find it a bit difficult. Like we get used to, as you say, certain way of writing, a certain way of putting questions forward, right? And as soon as someone sidesteps, then we tend to carry on the heritage, like in academia and training that we have received. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, it looks like David Tyndall has a question. Would you like to unmute?
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. This has been very interesting. I don't have a very well-defined question. I guess it's kind of a half-baked question, but I'll try to explain it. Basically, what I'm kind of interested in the context of this presentation is how to talk to people, first of all, with varying understandings of this technology and perhaps varying sort of interest or the extent to which they kind of welcome it or kind of opposed to it, just to kind of explain. And you kind of talked about the diversity on your team, which was actually quite interesting. But I've been thinking about this for a few reasons. One is, I've been involved a little bit with some computational stuff, and I found that there are some people on campus who are just adamantly opposed to this kind of stuff, and very often they don't know anything about it. It's like, I don't know anything about this, but I'm adamantly opposed to it. I've been following things fairly closely on Twitter, and I don't know if it's bimodal, but there's kind of a few places where people are concentrating. So there's kind of one group of people who kind of argue, well, the sky's the limit. We can do anything we want with ChatGPT. And then there's people at the other end that, this is terrible. It provides false information. It should be restricted or banned or whatever. I guess having played around with things a little bit, I sort of take the approach that it's not perfect, but it's an interesting tool, and there's some interesting things that you can do. And also, having listened to some podcasts, lots of people have super interesting things on how to use these tools that I never thought of. So anyways, I guess what my question is how do you talk about this technology to people who have very diverse understandings of it and interests in it?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm not sure I have an answer. I can say we've certainly experienced the whole gamut. And this year I have a research and scholarship leave to undertake this project. But before that, I was seconded to the Teaching and Learning Center for 3 years, where I got to interact with faculty on topics related to academic integrity and misconduct. And I can say that the polarizing views are certainly represented in that discourse as well. Everything from misconduct should not even be in our policies. This is a developmental issue, to a search and destroy kind of perspective, where if you cheat in my class, I will hunt you down and I will get you, and everything in between, right? I think some of that is exacerbated by notions of academic freedom, where people feel that their ability to assess students through the freedom that we have as academics also should also have an influence on policy, right? And we know that there are some parameters around academic freedom. With regards to the talk about artificial intelligence, I'm noticing similar kinds of polarization in that discourse. And one of the people whose work I found really exciting on this was, I'll just put it into the chat here. Well, I'll do a quick screen share. It's Orban's work on technology panics. I have a slide I can bring up here really quick. And she talks about the Sisyphean cycle of technology panics, building on that metaphor of Sisyphus, of who's had to roll the rock up the hill in Hades for all eternity. And she talks about these technology panics were the times in which general populations gripped by intense worry and concern about a certain tech, and that these cycles of technology panic are influential and recurring. She talks about worries that new tech is surprisingly similar to past technologies that have preoccupied parents and policymakers. What struck me when I read Orban's paper was that she wrote it in 2020, before ChatGPT came out, but she pointed to previous tech in society that had had a similar effect to what we could say now we're seeing with GPT technologies. She talked about the moral societal panic that came with the radio, and then the next decade with the television. In particular, the television and the internet as technologies that would corrupt young minds and lead to moral turpitude, and the demise of humanity and young people in a variety of ways. Of course, we know that didn't happen, but it was interesting for me to reflect on her paper and think about, okay, so she wrote this then, and I said to folks, in the last month or so, look, if we're worried about ChatGPT, we're worried about the wrong thing, because there's thousands of apps out there now that will do this. And in some ways, we're already using AI as part of our daily life, right? That we have devices in our home and we could say, hey, device, what's the weather today? And it will answer us. And we use this tech in a different way. So the fact that we've got ChatGPT is, in a way, I think, going to become a normal part. The AI will become a normal part of this. And another sort of thinking point that I've been bringing up to people is, you have young people in your life, 5 years old or younger, those people will never know school without artificial intelligence. And so kind of having people think about that, right? Like the people who've already graduated from university now didn't know school without the internet. I certainly did, but I didn't know school without the television. So there's a technology for every generation that the generation before didn't know anything about. And if we think ahead to the grandchildren of today, what will their world be like? It's something that we can't, I think, most of us can't reasonably conceptualize in the same way that our grandparents could never have imagined the internet. Did that help?
Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Christina Hendricks, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much. This is really exciting work. it's the area of ethics and AI is something I'm deeply interested in. I'm a philosopher, I teach ethics, so there's that connection. So I'm so happy that you're doing this and really looking forward to the results that you get. I had a really technical question, sort of about the research. So I'm taking lots of notes. So the research question is ethical implications of AI technologies for teaching, learning, and assessment. And I was just curious about the modified Turing test and sort of how that, maybe I just want to know more about the survey. So how is that survey kind of connecting to the research questions about ethical implications? Because you're talking about, can they identify if it's human or, anyway, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that. It's interesting.
Yeah, our colleagues at Brock, Kumar et al., when they ran their survey there, just with education profs, they did it with this sort of modified Turing test. So they didn't want to have binary output. They didn't want to have just AI or just human. They wanted the third option. So that was the copying text from the internet. And that there were certain controls in the generated text. So the paragraphs were 250 words or less. They were all written at a grade 10 reading level or less. They had a certain number of words and sentences. So there was some consistency in both the AI generated and human generated outputs, as well as what was taken from the internet. So there was that from a methodological perspective. But what fascinated us and helped us to craft our research question was that with their pilot study, they had a 60% fail rate among respondents, meaning that 60% of the time, faculty and other respondents could not accurately identify which text was generated by that GPT-2 technology. So we thought to ourselves, well, one, can we, get similar results? What will our results say if we go across campus? If our results are the same or similar, what does this mean in terms of writing assessments and designing assessments? If we have 2/3 of respondents who can't accurately identify whether a text was generated by an AI or not, what do we do? We don't have the answer to that, but we kind of wanted to figure out, does this mean that it's futile to give writing assignments? What do we give instead? How does that conversation all unpack? But we knew that if we wanted to offer provocations, such as, perhaps writing assignments may not be the most useful, then we know that our colleagues will challenge us and say, well, what is, and what evidence do you have to support that assertion? So we knew that we needed evidence, but knowing what the starting point was with the pilot kind of left us at a holy moly moment in terms of next steps.
Thank you. I couldn't get the unmute going. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. It's something that I had thought about too when this first came out. I was like, because I assigned papers in philosophy, I was like, if this can write papers in philosophy, what is the purpose of my assignments of writing papers in philosophy? What am I really doing that for? And how can I reach that purpose better? And I still don't have a great answer for that, but thank you.
I don't think anybody has the answers if it makes you feel any better.
Okay, good.
Can I just add a side note on that? I'm just thinking, previously I used to ask my students, the undergrads, to upload their term papers onto the Turnitin website or database, right? And then I stopped because I was told that, as we were talking before, that if the AI is learning to modify the language into subgroups, linguistic forms, right, to present other ways of speaking English, right, for groups. Then if the AI is able to digest whatever papers have been uploaded onto the Turnitin as a way of categorizing it as undergraduate level of writing, then that would be an option for the AI as well, right? It can generate a text according to that stereotype or that level of writing, and that would actually, instead of 2/3 not being able to recognize, I think 100% fail in that, if that option becomes available, if the AI is able to digest whatever database is available and turn it in, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And interesting you mentioned Turnitin. We're not addressing that at all in our research, but I was at a conference recently where they were showcasing their new AI detection feature in some of their products. claimed that it had a 97% accuracy rate, which caused some questions because even the developers of OpenAI they also had a detection tool that they released and it was not that high. So people were asking, how is Turnitin's product that high? But what was interesting was to see their response on social media to this tool, which the company told customers would be integrated into its packages. All customers would have it. And we don't use Turnitin in Canada very much, in part due to a legal case back about 20 years ago. Anyway, they do use it a lot in the UK and in Australia, and colleagues there were up in arms saying, how can they release this tool when they haven't allowed us, the users of Turnitin, to test the tool ourselves? They've only done in-house alpha testing. They hadn't done beta testing with people in the field, and people knew this because there's an academic integrity global community that, you know, sort of lives a lot of us live on Twitter and now Mastodon. But they're like, well, has anybody tested this tool? Has anybody tried it? And it's going to be forced on us, and we'll just have it. So now, as a result of the public pressure, Turnitin has allegedly created an opt-out aspect to this, because people were saying they did get a chance to thoroughly test it after the company had alleged it had a very good result or detection rate. So I think the question's still out, the jury's still out on the efficacy of detection tools, and certainly companies wanting to embed this into products. It's a whole different talk about academic integrity products as part of neoliberal commercialized education, but I'll save that talk for a different day.
I have a question. So congratulations on your recent, new funding and publications. That's so exciting. And I'm going to read the mechanical engineering paper probably right after this session. But in the meantime, I was wondering, so for that paper, do you think that your findings were really discipline specific in terms of, like, for educators at teaching centers, will the guidelines that we follow need to be discipline or faculty specific, or do you think that there will be larger themes that educators across campuses could draw upon?
It's a good question. It's actually a debate we have within the academic integrity field, right? And do we need policies that work across the university? Are there some that are discipline specific? And I think those tensions are fairly long-standing in that way. And if you ask me, I think the answer is both. We will need some things that are discipline specific because the tools are developed in different ways for different kinds of disciplines. So they are using AI-based tools in engineering and mathematics that are very different from those that we're using in text-based disciplines. And I was chatting with a colleague in biology this week, and he was telling me about an AI tool that can help with genome sequencing. And that is like totally out of my wheelhouse. But it was interesting to me that he was talking about the development of these different tools, using artificial intelligence to do certain things in certain disciplines. And I think, an overarching question for me is, regardless of the discipline, how can the tech be used ethically? And in part, I think we need the disciplinarians to weigh in on those conversations.
Thank you. And I actually have a follow-up question. So yeah, you've talked about instructors applying AI tech in ethical ways to support learning outcomes. And I know it's still really early, but I was wondering if you could say a little more about how that could look, or if you've seen any examples that educators could start thinking about.
Yeah, we've got through our teaching and learning center right now. It's really quite sort of basic, but it's a good starting point for most of us. I think we sort of started with the idea of like just talking with students about it, like asking students, what do they know about the apps? Are they using them? How do they think that the apps could be used to support their learning? Anecdotally, we've heard from our own students everything from that they're using it and they don't want to tell their profs, they don't care if their profs know, and other students that are terrified and think that if they're caught using them, that they will automatically fail. So we've got a lot of different opinions, I think, even in our student body already. And then also talking with students like explicitly about what are the instructor expectations around this, and thinking about how can assessments align, what might that look like? And then also just exploring, what others are doing out there. And I don't have the link handy. I would have to send it to you later, but there's actually a really great Facebook group led by somebody at the University of Central Oklahoma, and it's the use of artificial intelligence writing in higher education. And she's started it in January, and I think she's got like 3,000 people that are already part of it, all from higher ed. And part of it, I think, is crowdsourcing the information together because none of us have the answers.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? In the meantime, I heard on the CBC yesterday that there was an open letter published recently asking, I'll share it in the chat, basically with lots of signatures asking AI developers to slow down for 6 months so the rest of us could catch up. I thought that was really interesting. I was wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I have heard about the letter, and it's very interesting for me. I think that there's probably a strong argument to be made that the average person hasn't yet caught up with this, and politicians and policymakers haven't yet caught up with it, and the development is moving really fast, right? So like I said, it's very unsettling for me as a researcher to be involved in a project where the basis of the development of my data collection instrument is outdated before we had even, sort of started to deploy it. So yeah, it's moving fast. It's really very unsettling in that way. And even in our institutions, like our policymakers can't keep up. They're worried. There's a lot of knee-jerk reactions. So yes, I think letting the rest of the world catch up is it is a concern. At the same time, we also know that like Microsoft has invested $10 billion minimum into OpenAI, and there's every indication that artificial intelligence capabilities will be fully integrated into Microsoft Office through its new products like Copilot, or into the Google suite of products. And the big tech companies are pretty much engaged in a race to get this integrated as quickly as possible. It's reasonable to expect that will happen in the next 12 to 24 months. I don't know that a public call for a pause will actually stop the big corporate machine, but things like even talking about the letter will help us to create spaces, I think, for more dialogue.
Okay. Oh, Christina, yes.
Sure. I have another question, so thank you. You had mentioned, so you've gotten the Calgary funding and then also this connection grant, which is wonderful for the event happening, I think it was in June. And then you were talking about like a SHRC, what is it, partnership grant or partnership development grant or something. Yeah, but more interesting, more what I was focusing on was you were thinking about making this a sort of multidisciplinary, multi-institutional, multinational. So if anybody might be interested in looking into that more.
Okay, well, I didn't come today trying to pitch that project.
I know.
Like very early conceptual stages. But yeah, if you're interested, then drop me a note and we can have an individual meeting about what that would look like. Yeah, we have these colleagues in different places. So Brock developed the instrument that we've adapted, right? So it made sense to partner with them. And then I have connections to Deakin University and to Phil Dawson. He's part of sort of the academic integrity world. And he's got a really great book called Defending Assessment Security. And he has this background in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And there's a group over there that we're doing sort of the beginnings of similar work. And one of the papers that I mentioned earlier was by Margaret Behrman, and Margaret is also at Deakin, and she does some work in artificial intelligence. We're like, well, we've got these people that are all starting to do this work around the same time. Why don't we Why don't we try and collaborate and see what that would look like? We don't have a really well-defined research question for that yet, but it's in the works. But part of the idea was if we can get some of these folks together that want to collaborate on this project while we've got Phil here and he's in our time zone, that we can start to think about what might a collaborative project look like a partnership development grant.
That's great. Thanks. I mean, you just mentioned it. I don't have any plans. It was just like, that sounds kind of interesting. So thanks.
Okay, last chance. Okay, David posted a question or comment in the chat. I will read it out, or do you want to read it out? I'll read it out since you posted it.
Okay.
Okay. Is turning the integrity question to scholars, researchers. Is turning the integrity question to scholars, researchers. Even if no misconducting is knowingly undertaken, it may become more difficult to assess the unique contributions of researcher scholars. This may become a challenge in tenure and promotion, etc.
Yeah. Yes, all of that. And I can chime in one thing before you go quickly, and that's that some of the big publishers, so Springer Nature and others, have already declared, for example, that ChatGPT cannot be named as a co-author. It can be acknowledged in the methods section, the acknowledgements introduction, but that it can't be a co-author because humans remain responsible for scientific and scholarly outputs.
Thank you. Interesting.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Well, I've counted to 10 like a good teacher to leave the quiet awkwardness. So I suppose there's no more questions at this point. Sarah, thank you so much. This has been really informative. I particularly appreciated what you said about the utility of these tools for people with disabilities and how a lot of this came from the 1980s. That is really going to stay with me. So yeah, really appreciate your time and sharing your work and expertise with us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation and provocations. Really appreciate the chance to talk to other researchers.
Thank you.
See you next time. Feel free to stay in touch. Bye.
Bye.
I'm Catherine Corrigal-Brown, the head of sociology at UBC. Thanks for watching our video. To learn more about UBC sociology, please subscribe.